This Supreme Court presidential immunity opinion definitely consequential, and that's probably a good thing if your name is Donald Trump. Remember his conviction in that odd non-disclosure case, hush money case in New York? Well, now the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg's office, has agreed not to oppose a delay in former Trump's sentencing even as they contest his arguments for immunity. They don't agree with it, but they're like, okay, we'll delay because this was a major decision that was released on Monday regarding presidential immunity. And then Trump is citing that as the reason for this, the reason why he needs a delay to figure all of this out. And it seems to make sense. I think there's a lot of questions as it relates to all of his legal problems, including this one that was issued in the case that was issued, the charges issued in Manhattan, and then the conviction that occurred, of course, in Manhattan as well. Roshini Rajkumar joining us, political consultant, attorney, and host of the Crisis Files podcast. Roshini, it's nice to have you back at the program.
It's great to be with you, Tom, and you really do need some sort of Venn diagram to keep track of all of the legal things going on, especially after the Supremes made their decision.
Well, we know who loves Venn diagrams, don't we? We'll just leave that one there. All right, Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, they decide not to oppose this. I mean, in terms of the delay, they don't agree that he's immune in this case, but anyway, the delay is probably going to be granted once the request comes through and all that kind of stuff. Is this the right decision? And if so, is it beneficial for both sides, the prosecution side and the defense?
Well, it's probably more beneficial for the defense, but Alvin Bragg really didn't have a choice. Once the Supremes hand down a decision like this, and incidentally, I don't like using the term unprecedented, but it was unprecedented. And I feel their decision was clearly trying to separate actual official acts from private acts, but therein lies the challenge now to the trial courts below that might have to revisit some of these issues, because we've never really been on this kind of ground before, and just even how you define private versus official will be argued down to the letter by Trump's team and therefore the prosecutors too in all of these different cases. So as far as Alvin Bragg goes, he really had no choice but to just say, yep, I'm not going to fight this, because it's a losing battle and you're using taxpayer dollars if you're trying to fight it anyway. So now we just have to see it play out. But what I've seen is probably we're not going to get back to any kind of decision on sentencing of that case, or even if a sentencing happens, until more like September. So, I mean, this really changes up a lot of these timelines, Tom.
It does. And a lot of people will claim, well, this was, this case in Manhattan, that was not a federal case, that this was a state case, and therefore the Supreme Court ruling has no bearing on this. But that's not really the case, is it?
No, because, I mean, I understand why someone might make that argument. The U.S. Supreme Court decisions generally have a bearing on almost anything that happens in the United States. And, whether it's like in the case of the very controversial Dobbs opinion, where they were sending some things back to the states to make their own different state decisions. But when it's something like this, and especially when it's about the presidency, the Supreme Court and the federal courts are really the ones who are empowered to make decisions when it comes to actions of the president or actions of Congress. It is not really in the hands of the states.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the role of this judiciary here, to establish what is constitutional, what's not, and that would apply to federal laws and state laws and probably county laws and ordinances as well. What do you think of the overall immunity rule, the opinion that came down? I mean, it basically, the Supreme Court's ruling, it grants, significant immunity to former presidents for their official acts. And I don't know how much you've been paying attention to all the rhetoric out there, but I know that Justice Sotomayor and others have come out and said this is now a ruling that allows this president to be king, and he can do whatever he wants, including ordering SEAL Team 6 to go out and murder his political opponent without any consequences. And to me, I was surprised that a justice would also make that argument, Sotomayor. Is there any legitimacy to that?
I would hope not. And yes, it always makes me very sad when any of the justices on the Supreme Court it's fine to have a very strongly worded opinion, but when you put inflammatory language either into your opinion, which I'm assuming that's where that language came from, because she frankly should not be talking to the media, that kind of language is very inflammatory. And in the kind of landscape we are living, when you are a Supreme Court justice, you've got to know your words matter. They sway. And then what they do also is anyone who agrees with you is going to go to the nth degree in maybe using that rhetoric. So what I want people to understand is, yes, this was a very consequential decision. Usually when a Supreme Court makes decisions, I would like to believe, I can't prove this, but in looking at case law over the years and the actual opinions from the Supreme Court, they are assuming the actors are behaving ethically, honestly, and, to the higher angels. Now, that is why they handed down a decision that separated the presidential official acts from the private acts. And that is kind of where this is going to sit moving forward. I don't think it's correct or fair that we go too overboard and say this hands every president, because frankly, I hope we're not electing people who could do something that treacherous as ordering a hit on an opponent or whatnot. So that's what we have to kind of a reality check on. Who are we electing? And let's remember, the Supreme Court justices, I mean, what troubles me, Tom, is that people are trying to enlarge the Supreme Court or bash the Supreme Court. That is not the time for this. Believe it or not, the Supreme Court is the best chance we've got right now with a crazy Congress and a very crazy presidential election going on.
Well, I think that's why, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, came out and he kind of rebuked Sotomayor and, for that matter, Ketanji Brown Jackson, because they were raising all these concerns about presidents committing crimes with impunity if immunity is too broad. But he addressed that issue and said this in no way protects a president who commits a crime such as murder. This is not, and he was very specific about it. So he pushed back on that argument, but it's still being made. And as you know, television pundits come out and they do the same thing, and it's this fear-mongering that exists. So the way I understand this is that this would apply to every president and former president, including, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. And you can make the argument, okay, this should protect all of them because they make decisions in war, for example, that are sometimes disastrous decisions. And they maybe made a mistake, in hindsight. And maybe an American was killed overseas, which happened under Barack Obama. But it happens all the time. It happens all the time. And it shouldn't be something they're charged for as if they committed a criminal act or a criminal act of murder. There needs to be some type of immunity based on those situations. And this is what that protects in my reading of this. Is that about right?
I think that was really well said. And I would say, regardless of your party, and I'm very central, Chief Justice Roberts is a very reasoned and respected jurist. And he was part of the majority on this. And it was his opinion, and that, he inked that opinion. So we have to remember these justices they care about their opinions. They care about the United States. And that is also why they shouldn't just be saying things loosey-goosey and let their words fly, because their words do matter. So most people are not attorneys out there. What I really want people to do is go back to the good book, the Constitution, and read about the separation of powers, read what each branch is supposed to do, and they're also supposed to keep a check on the other branches.
Yeah.
So if a future president goes rogue, we've got the Congress and the judiciary keeping a check on it, as well as all of us American citizens. So, this is not the end of the world. This is not letting out chaos. And the more that we as American citizens put that rhetoric out there, the more dangerous it is for us as a nation against our enemies out there.
So much appreciated. Roshini Rajkumar, host of the Crisis Files podcast. Thanks so much. 760 WJR.